What's up, everybody? With this one, we're going to go over a brief overview of the layout of Photoshop. When you first open up the program, you should see something quite like this. It'll default to the home page where you'll have New and Open, as well as Learn your files shared with you and Lightroom right there. There's also this section on tutorials, which I highly recommend. YouTube is another great place to check them out. But as you go here, you can find a ton of tutorials on how to do some things. Some will be covered in the class, some won't. But again, a lot of what you're going to want to learn how to do might be very individual. So you would want to seek that out on your own. One of the cool ones right here, if you click on Lightroom Photos, it'll actually open up and link to your Lightroom gallery. So you'll see the folders you have set up. So that way you could quickly find your Lightroom photos and add them into Photoshop to do some edits. From home, the other big thing we'll talk about is new file right here, where if you're starting with a blank document, instead of just dragging a photo in, you'd want to click new file. Always pay attention to the size of the file. Usually we want to think in inches, like 8 by 10, and resolution wants to be 180 if you're using for screens, 300 if you're thinking about printing it out. So a lot of the stuff we want to make is either like 240 or 300 for the pixels per inch. And then you could click create. And we'll just make this blank document here. So this is our blank document with our standard workspace. Our toolbar can look like this. Or if we click on these two little arrows up here, we can get it side by side. Might help with some smaller screens. One of the things that I love in Photoshop is if you're not sure what a tool is, you can just hover over it and it'll tell you what it does and even give you a little video example. So for example, this is the clone stamp, which helps you clone things. And if you want to learn even more about it, you can click learn more. With our tools, if you see a little arrow down in the corner like we have here, on a lot of these, that means that there are other tools hidden underneath it. So for example, this is a selection box tool that lets us select a box. And well, let's find a photo to have add up here. All right, so we're adding in this photo of the baseball team. And this selection tool right here will allow you to select an area. And then we can move to another tool like the move tool. Oh, we need to right click and rasterize this layer to make it editable. And now I can move that out. If I didn't want to select just a square from it, I could click on this. There's also circles as well as lines. And underneath our paintbrush tool, we have the pencil tool, mixer brush tool. Under paint buckets, we also have gradient tools. Under the type tool, we have horizontal and vertical type. So they try to keep things grouped together, but there are a lot of tools hidden underneath the other ones. And that's our toolbar. On this side of the panels, we have color for when we are going to paint in. So I clicked on the paintbrush. I can adjust the size of the brush and then select the color from over here. There are also default swatches. So maybe I want to work just in CMYK or grayscale, and I want to use the same colors consistently. We've got gradients and patterns there too. If we have this part and we're like, you know what, we're not going to be using much color, we can always double click on it and that'll hide right there. Same thing with properties. When I select this right here, we can see that the width of it is 2000 by or 2400 by 1642. And let's say I wanted to make that half the size. I could type in 1200 and hit enter. And now this element is half the size. And that's a quick way to resize things. Make sure that this is locked, because if this wasn't locked and I told it to like switch to 600, it'll squish it. So we want to keep that locked so those stay consistent. We could also use this to flip an element in our photo. We can also make some adjustments to our images there, as well as libraries to pull up assets we might have added in. Most importantly, right down here, we have our layers panel. And with our layers, it's thinking about how things are stacked up in the image. Photoshop allows us to have multiple layers going. That helps us make composites. So as I drag in this photo of Mr. Allred, being incredibly photogenic, you'll notice that this layer right here, the new one, which it just has a random name, I could double click on this and rename it, is on top of the baseball photo. So as I drag it over, it's on top. But I could grab the baseball photo, place that there. So how things are stacked up in our layers is how they look in the image. Finally, down here, we have a few different things. We have our special effects, which allows us to add effects to it. So let's say we want this photo to have a drop shadow. We could put a drop shadow on it, and we'll get this little menu right here popping up. And right now we can't really see it. There it goes. Let's make this drop shadow a little bit bigger, a little bit darker, and that way you could see it, as well as a ton of other options up here that you might want to check out. The other one from down here that we'll talk a lot about is our layer masks and our adjustment layers. With layer masks, what this allows us to do is put a piece of paper over that layer, and you'll see that paper is currently white and everything's visible. But what I can do is grab the paintbrush, switch to black, and paint on this white layer. And anywhere where I paint white, it'll erase. This is a little bit different than just erasing that original image, because if we were to erase it, that information would be gone. But using this layer mask, we're doing non-destructive editing. And that allows us to paint this back in with white in case we want to bring back some of that photo. And again, we'll cover that a lot throughout the class. The last bit is our adjustments option right down here, which allows us to make adjustments to the photo. So for example, if I wanted to mess with the hue and saturation of just this layer, I can add a hue saturation mask that'll apply to this layer. And I can just drag this hue around and change the colors or the saturation. And that is our toolbar panel and our side panel. Across the top here, we have File, where we can create new documents, open other documents, and save. And there's a few different ways we can save in Photoshop. We can save it as a Photoshop document, which would be right up here, a save or save as. So as this pops up, we can save it onto our computer. And we can save it as a Photoshop document from this one, or a TIFF, or a PDF. And all of these allow us to keep the layers of our image intact. But the issue with that is if we send that file to someone who doesn't have Photoshop, they wouldn't be able to open it. If we were going to send this as a completed image, we might want to export it. And if we click export, we have quick export as ping, which is the quickest way to export it. Or we could go save for web. And we never really want to save as a GIF, because GIF, you can see the color table is pretty limited and you get very grainy images, versus going to ping, where things much smoother. Tells us our image size, and then we can save it right there. And that's all under File. We can also print and exit the program. Under Edit, we have ways of making edits to our photos. So let's select that baseball photo. We could come here and transform it and flip it around, scale it, and adjust it. A lot of that under Control T. As well, if we scroll down, a lot of advanced edits that we might not need at this point. Under Image, we can make adjustments to it. Again, doing vibrance, hue, saturation, making it black and white. We can change the image size or the canvas size here. Layers gives us options to adjust the layers. Type is important when we're typing on it. And then selection as well. And we'll talk about this more in detail because there's a lot to selections. We also have filters that we can apply to our photos, where the easiest one to check out is Filter Gallery, where when we open this up, we can apply a filter to it and even change the intensity of those filters. The other cool one with it is our neural filters. So as we click on this, let's get back to this all red layer. There we go. And we'll make this layer a little bit bigger. So I'm hitting Control T, transforming it, bringing it right here. And if we go to neural filters, this is a new one with Photoshop that'll give us a ton of options. And it's going to try to give us a tour because first time open it. They have beta filters. Let's skip all that, and end. So with this one, there are smart portrait stuff, super zoom, colorize, makeup transfer, where you can take makeup from one photo and apply it to another one. And all of these are fairly automatic. So I'm going to download this portraits one, and that'll take a second here. So as we look at this photo of Mr. Allred, it finds his face, and we can increase his happiness because Mr. Allred not looking too happy there. And we're just going to max it out, see what that looks like. It's going to process in the cloud for a second, and we'll let this load. And look at that, Mr. Allred suddenly happy to be up on stage. We can also drop age, increase how much hair someone has, and even change the direction their eyes are looking. We can also add in other emotions, change the way their head's looking, and all of that with just nice little dragging sliders. There's a bunch of cool ones to check out here. It's an interesting one. The final part of this is window, and this will show all of our windows that we can have pop up that currently aren't in view. And that might happen if we accidentally close a panel. Like currently we have layers open, so there's a check mark. But if it wasn't there, we could always come up here to window and layers. That should be our brief overview of Photoshop.